The wind blew hard across the high plains, cold enough to bite through wool and skin and bone. Snow drifted sideways, piling against fence posts and shuttered windows, muffling the world in white silence. Along the rutted road a woman stumbled. Her coat flapped open, her hair matted to her cheeks, her boots soaked through and stiff with ice. She held a bundled shape close to her chest, too small, too still. Her breath came shallow, ragged. With each step her legs buckled a little more. The child in her arms weighed heavier than before, not with the strength of life, but the unbearable truth of what she could no longer ignore. The snow didn't care. The sky didn't care. The land had swallowed better women whole. She had knocked on 4 doors already that morning, and every one of them closed tighter than the last. Faces peeked through curtains. Voices whispered behind walls. No one wanted the burden of her misery, not in the dead of winter, not with mouths to feed and fires to tend. A widow, they guessed. Or worse. A girl who had sinned, wandered, been cast out. No man beside her. No ring. No story they wanted to hear. By the time she reached the wooden sign, half buried in snow, 3 letters faded with wind and time, her knees gave way. She fell forward into a drift, burying the child against her body. The snow welcomed her with open arms. The silence was almost kind. Then came hooves, slow and deliberate. A single rider approached from the ridge, his coat flaring at the edges, his horse moving with the wary gait of one trained to step through storms and silence. He pulled up just shy of her body boots, crunching in the snow as he dismounted. He didn't speak, just looked. She opened her eyes enough to see him, a man with sunburnt skin and a thick wool scarf drawn up to his eyes. His face was half covered, his hair wind-blown and crusted with ice. He looked like he belonged to the storm itself. Still he crouched, reached out with one gloved hand. She didn't flinch. Couldn't. She watched as he brushed the snow away from the child's face, pausing only a second before lifting the bundle from her arms. He stood again, holding the child close, his brows drawn tight. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking aloud or to herself. He didn't answer. Not then. He only looked at her, then at the sky, as if judging how long before the next swell of wind. Then, without asking, he bent down and lifted her too, one arm around her back, the other steadying the child between them. They rode in silence. His ranch sat low in a shallow basin, wind-broken by a ring of trees, and flanked by 2 barns, dark with storm soot. The house itself was squat, made of thick timber and old stone, smoke curling from the chimney. The porch groaned under his boots as he carried them both inside. The warmth hit her like a slap. Firelight flickered against the walls, casting soft glows on worn furniture and iron kettles. He laid the child down on a folded quilt near the hearth, unwrapping the layers of cloth with care. She knelt beside him, her fingers trembling. "Is he?" she began. He placed a hand on the child's chest, waited, then nodded once. "Alive," he said. Her shoulders broke, then shaking with soundless sobs. She pressed her forehead to the floorboards, the warmth of the fire rising through her bones like grace. He said nothing, just moved to hang her coat by the stove, set water to boil, then poured 2 mugs of something dark and hot. When she looked up, her cheeks streaked with tears, he handed her a mug. She took it without meeting his eyes. "I'll find work," she said. "I don't expect nothing for free." He leaned against the table, silent still. "I can sew, clean, cook if you've got time to teach me." Her voice cracked. "Just let us stay till spring." He looked at her then, really looked at the wear in her clothes, the bruises half healed along her jaw, the way she curled herself protectively toward the sleeping child. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Miriam." He nodded once. "I'm Call." And that was all. The days blurred slow and muffled under the weight of snow and silence. The storm did not lift so much as it eased, letting in slivers of gray light, enough to see the fences again, enough to smell smoke on the wind. Call worked the barns by habit, moving with a rhythm that needed no audience. Miriam watched from the window, her hands wrapped around a mug gone lukewarm. The boy Elijah had taken to sleeping long hours in the warmth, coughing in short fits, but breathing steady. She didn't ask for help again. By the second morning she rose before daylight, knotted her hair back, and stepped barefoot onto the kitchen floor to stoke the fire. Call had already split wood. She found it stacked neatly outside the door. The gesture made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. In town, doors had closed like gunshots. Here things happened without words. A coat mended, a bowl refilled, boots drying near the stove. She wasn't sure if it was mercy or just the shape of his nature. By the end of the week she'd taken over the meals, thick stews, cornmeal biscuits, hard as stone at first, but softening with practice. Cal never commented, but he always finished every bite. He'd return from the fields late, covered in frost and dusk, and sit across from her without ceremony. They didn't talk much. Still, she learned things. That he lived alone had since his father passed nearly 6 winters back. That the ranch hadn't seen another hand in nearly 2 years. That his mother had left when he was just a boy, taken a train east and never written. He never spoke it plain, but the house said enough. Too clean for a man alone. Pictures packed away. A cradle in the attic covered with burlap and dust. Ghosts lived here, but quiet ones. One night after the boy had fallen asleep by the hearth, Miriam found Cal outside his back to the house, staring out across the white. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her and stepped up beside him. "He's feeling stronger," she said. He nodded, didn't look at her. "Good boy. Got the will." They stood a while, listening to the brittle sounds of winter, the creak of branches, the soft sigh of snow shifting under its own weight. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. His jaw twitched. "Sometimes." "Why don't you?" "Too many things stay behind." She turned that over in her head. She knew what it was to carry too much. But she also knew what it meant to have nothing. "I came from south of Elkhorn," she said quietly. "My husband died last spring. Fever took him quick. His folks said we could stay a while, but things turned cold before the frost even came." Call looked at her now, the moon catching the hollows in his face. He didn't ask what they'd done. He didn't have to. She stared out toward the trees. "I kept thinking, just make it to next week. Just get through one more cold night. But you get to a point where you stop thinking. You just keep moving. Until you can't." She nodded. "Until you can't." They stood there a long time, not speaking. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with everything neither of them could say yet. Later, back inside, she watched him light the last lamp. His hands were rough, cracked from years of work, but steady. He moved like someone used to being alone but not made for it. That night, Elijah reached for her in his sleep, whispering nonsense, small and soft. She curled around him on the floor near the fire, but her eyes stayed open, watching the door to Cal's room, wondering what it meant that he'd let her in, that he hadn't asked her to go, that he didn't ask questions he knew already hurt. The storm outside was losing strength, but inside something else had begun to gather. The snow thawed slow in patches, first along the fence lines, then in the shallow dips where the sun lingered longest. Mud took the place of frost, and the ground gave a little under each step, soft with the promise of spring but not yet ready. The air still bit hard in the mornings. You could see your breath clear into April. Miriam woke early. Earlier than Call now. She'd gather kindling from the shed before sunrise, her skirts hitched up out of the mud, her boots soaked through by the time she came in. Elijah had started walking again, slow and stiff, at first his little arms clinging to her skirt for balance. She watched him from the kitchen, her chest tight with a strange mix of joy and fear. "He's stubborn," Call said one morning, watching the boy teeter around the stove. "He gets it honest," she replied. It was the first time she'd smiled without flinching. The rhythm between them shifted quietly. Call no longer left without a word, and Miriam no longer waited to be asked. She started mending things around the house: curtains, buttons, hinges that creaked. He taught her how to saddle a horse, how to hold the reins without white-knuckling it, how to split wood without catching her knuckles. She was awful at first, then better, then proud. "Don't favor the axe," he said one afternoon, watching her try again. "Let the weight do the work." She rolled her eyes. "Easy for you to say you've got shoulders like a damned ox." He almost smiled. They began working side by side, branding calves, clearing brush, checking fence lines. He never let her take the hardest jobs, but she insisted more and more. Her hands blistered and calloused. She wore through a pair of gloves. Her back ached at night. She found it all strangely welcome. Sometimes they'd share a meal in the barn. Sometimes they'd ride out past the creek where the land opened wide, untouched, golden with dead grass and wet earth. There the silence between them felt different, not lonely, just full. Once near the bluff, she asked him what he wanted, if there was anything more for him than this ranch and these empty hills. He took a long while to answer. "I always figured I'd die out here," he said. "Didn't think much past that." She looked down at her hands, then out at the sky. "That what you still want?" He looked at her then, long and clear. "I don't know anymore." That night when they rode back, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake on the pallet beside Elijah, who'd taken to snoring a little, his mouth open, one arm flung across her ribs. The fire had burned low. The wind whistled in the eaves. She watched the shadows on the wall and wondered what it meant to build something new when everything you'd known was gone. In town they would never let her forget. A woman like her with a child and no man to name. No papers. No family. But here something else was taking shape. Not fast. Not loud. But real. Still spring brought more than thaw. Word spread slow but steady, new rail coming through land-changing hands, old neighbors sniffing around for second chances. One morning Cal returned from town with news his uncle, a bitter man with sharp opinions, had taken sick. Said he meant to leave Cal a claim in Wyoming, some cattle, maybe a clean start. "You going?" she asked. He looked at her, unreadable. "Ain't decided." What would it change? He didn't answer. That night he didn't sit with her at supper. Rode out instead. Stayed gone until the moon was high. When he came back, she didn't ask where he'd been. The next day she packed Elijah's coat in a bundle just in case. Join this journey where broken souls find strength again. Subscribe and never miss the next chapter. 3 days passed without a word. Cal worked the fence line deep into dusk and came back long after the fire had burned down. He'd eat alone at the table, quiet boots still muddy. Miriam stopped trying to fill the silence. She could feel it now. Something had shifted, not in a sudden way, but like ice cracking beneath your feet before the break. On the 4th morning, Elijah asked if they were leaving. "Not yet," she said, brushing his hair back. "We'll know when it's time." But the ache in her stomach hadn't left since Cal brought back that news. A clean start. Cattle land, a place that hadn't been darkened by years of loss. No woman with a child he hadn't made. No past that clung to her skirts. That afternoon she found him behind the barn, mending a broken gate latch. She stood there for a minute, arms crossed, her breath rising in little clouds. "You could have told me," she said. He didn't turn. Didn't figure it was yours to carry. That's not your choice to make. He stood slowly, turning to face her. His eyes were tired, his jaw tight. "You think I don't know what folks'll say if I stay?" she asked, voice rising. A man alone taking in a woman and her child. What that makes me look like what it makes you look like. I don't give a damn what they say, he said. Then why are you pulling away? He was silent for a beat too long. I've done this before, he finally said. Let someone close. Thought maybe I'd build something. They always leave. Or worse, they stay and make you wish they had left. I'm not them. I know. Then stop acting like I don't know what this is. He looked down, ran a hand over his mouth. You and that boy are the first thing that's felt real in a long time. That scares the hell out of me. She stepped closer. The wind picked up sharp and cold. Her hair whipped across her face. You think I'm not scared, she said. I walked through a blizzard with a dying child in my arms. I buried a husband with my bare hands because no one else would dig. I've been run out, turned away, looked down on like I was a stain folks were ashamed to step around. You think I'm standing here because it's easy? He met her eyes then, and for once didn't look away. She shook her head, voice trembling. I'm standing here because something in me still hopes this ain't the end of the road. That maybe, just maybe, this is where things turn. He stepped forward close enough she could feel the heat coming off him. I don't know what comes next, he said, voice low. But if you stay, if you want to, we can try. Just don't expect me to have the words for it every time. I don't need words, she whispered. I just need you to stay in the room. His hand reached for hers then. Rough, callous, but steady. I'm not going to Wyoming, he said. She exhaled slow and deep, and her forehead dropped to his chest. For a long time neither of them moved. Later that night, as Elijah slept curled beneath the quilt, Miriam sat with Cal by the fire. They didn't speak, but their shoulders touched. The kind of closeness that meant more than anything spoken. The wind howled outside, but inside it was quiet. Not hollow. Not empty. Just full enough. Spring came in slow fits. First the crocuses, pushing up through thawed patches near the house, then the bleating of calves born slick and shivering in the wet grass. Mud coated everything for weeks. The yard turned to soup under their boots. But the light changed. The air lost its bite. And with it so did something in Miriam. She began to laugh more. Not loudly and not often, but real. Elijah chased the chickens one morning until he tripped and landed face first in a pile of straw, and she laughed until her ribs hurt. Cal looked up from the porch and smiled, that quiet, slanting kind that never quite reached his mouth but sat soft in his eyes. They fell into something not named, not declared, but unmistakably theirs. He built her a clothesline beside the barn. She carved him a wooden spoon when his cracked in half from stirring too hard. He taught Elijah how to hold a nail steady, and she watched them from the kitchen with her arms elbow-deep in dough, heart swelling in ways that made her afraid to blink too hard. Then word came. A man rode up the lane on a tired gray horse wearing a black coat slick with dust. He asked for Miriam by name. She froze when she saw him, took Elijah by the hand and stepped back. The man touched the brim of his hat. Ma'am, I'm looking for you on behalf of your late husband's kin. Cal stepped out onto the porch. He didn't reach for his rifle, but he stood the way men do when they've counted all the ways something could go wrong. They say you took something that wasn't yours, the man went on. Said the boy don't belong to you by blood. Said you ran when they asked for him back. Miriam's stomach turned to iron. Her grip on Elijah's hand tightened. I raised him, she said, her voice low. Fed him when no one else would. Sat up with him when the fever came. He's mine. Law says otherwise. They've filed claim in Jefferson County. Judge'll be hearing it come summer. Cal stepped forward. You've said your piece. Ride on. The man didn't argue, just nodded once and turned his horse around. But the sound of hooves carried long after he was gone. That night Miriam sat at the table long after Elijah had gone to bed. Her hands trembled around her mug. Carl stood across from her, arms crossed. "You never told me," he said. "I didn't think it would follow me this far." He sat down slow. "Is it true?" "He was my sister's. She died birthing him. Her husband drank himself into a grave 3 months later. His family didn't want the child until they saw what he could be worth. Some pity story to wave at the neighbors. Some claim to respectability." She looked up. Her eyes burned. "I wasn't going to let him grow up like that." Carl's voice was quiet. "We'll fight it. Don't make promises you can't keep." He shook his head. "I'm not." She stared at him, heart hammering. "They'll come with papers, with names and witnesses, and the kind of money we don't have. I'll stand up for you." "Why?" He met her eyes, held them. "Because I want you here. Both of you." That night he laid a hand on her shoulder, tentative, and she leaned into it. A small thing, but enough to hold her together. Outside the wind had changed. Not warm, not yet, but different. Hope didn't come loud out here. It came in the shape of a man staying seated when trouble walked in. It came in the shape of a woman choosing not to run. They spent the next week preparing, though neither said the word court out loud. Miriam wrote down everything she could remember: birth dates, neighbors who might vouch for her, letters she had tucked away in the bottom of a tin box that proved she hadn't stolen the child, only kept him breathing. Carl rode to town twice, once to speak to a man he trusted at the feed store, another time to send a telegram. He didn't say to who, but she saw the tightness in his jaw when he returned. She sat on the porch one evening, Elijah asleep inside, watching the light fall across the hills. The sun looked gentler now, more golden than sharp. Carl came out with 2 mugs of chicory and sat beside her. He didn't speak, just handed it to her, their fingers brushing for a second too long. She looked down into the steam. "They won't care that I raised him. They'll want blood." He nodded. "Maybe, but that boy chooses you every time. That has to count for something. You think the law cares what a 6-year-old wants?" "No, but a jury might." She turned to him. "You'd stand in front of them, say you knew us, say you'd trust me with a child. I'd say I love you." She froze. The words hung there between them, quiet as snowfall, terrifying in their simplicity. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. She let out a breath. "You shouldn't say that if you're not sure." "I've been sure a long time," he said. "Just didn't know what to do with it." She laughed, but it came out like a sob. She set her mug down, covered her face with her hands. "You pick a hell of a time, Carl." He leaned in, resting his forehead against the side of her head, his voice low. "You're not alone in this. I want you to stop thinking like you are." That night she slept in his bed for the first time, not in the way of passion, but in the way of peace. He held her without words. She wept quietly into the hollow of his throat until sleep pulled her under. In the weeks that followed, she stood taller, rode into town with him chin high. Let the gossip see her. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. She wore her truth like armor. Elijah followed Cal around the ranch like a pup, small hammer in hand boots too big. Carl let him, never correcting, always steady. One afternoon, Miriam watched from the garden as the boy climbed into Cal's lap, wrapped his arms around his neck, and said plainly, "I wish you were my real pa." Carl held him for a long time, didn't say a word. But when Elijah ran off again, he looked over at Miriam and gave a slow nod, as if to say, "I heard that. I'll carry it." And then the letter came. A court date set for June the 5th, Jefferson County. A summons with her name spelled wrong, but clear enough to hold weight. She read it twice before her hands began to shake. She looked at Cal. "This is real now." "It was always real," he said. Now it's just louder. That night, as they watched the fire burn low, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. Simple silver, old, like it had belonged to someone before either of them. "Was my mother's," he said. "Only thing she left behind worth anything." Miriam stared at it. Her voice caught. "I don't need—" "I know," he said, "but I want you to have it. You don't need to wear it now. Just know it's here. For when you do." She didn't take it right away. She just looked at him, at the lines on his face, the steadiness in his hands. Then she reached out and closed his fingers around it. "After we win," she whispered. They arrived in Jefferson County 2 days early, staying at a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and coal smoke. The town pulsed louder than the prairie horses, clattering voices shouting down streets, men in heavy coats spitting tobacco near the courthouse step. Elijah held tight to Miriam's hand and didn't speak the entire walk from the wagon. Inside their room the ceiling leaked. The mattress sagged. But Miriam sat up straight in the lamplight, going over her notes again and again, lips moving silently as she rehearsed what she'd say. Carl sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass, one boot tapping restlessly against the floor. The morning of the hearing she tied Elijah's hair back neat and wiped the dust from his shoes with a damp cloth. She smoothed her dress flat over her knees. Cal offered her his arm as they stepped out into the street, and she took it chin high, as if the stairs didn't reach her anymore. Inside, the courthouse was cold and made of stone. The benches were worn smooth by decades of judgment. The man from the ranch road was there, seated beside a pale woman with pinched lips, her late husband's cousin's wife. The one who'd filed the claim. The one who hadn't written in 4 years but now wept as if she'd lost something holy. Miriam stood when called, gave her name, spoke slow and steady. "I raised Elijah since the day he was born. I buried my sister with my own hands. I fed him when I went hungry. I never asked for help, only mercy." The woman's lawyer questioned her sharp, tried to twist her words. "You admit you are not the child's biological mother?" "I do." "You have no legal adoption papers?" "No." "You left without their permission?" "I left because they said the boy was a burden they couldn't carry. I carried him anyway." He turned to the judge. "No blood, no papers, no claim." Carl stood then. The lawyer looked annoyed. "And you are—" "Caleb Monroe, owner of the Northridge Ranch. I've known Miriam and her boy going on 5 months. They live with me now." "You're not kin?" "No." "You and the woman are in a relationship?" Cale looked at Miriam. "We are." "And you think that entitles her to keep the child?" "I think anyone who's seen the way that boy looks at her would know there's no other home for him." The courtroom fell quiet. The judge was old, thick-browed, tired. He looked over the papers again, then down at Elijah, who sat still between them, hands folded in his lap. Finally the judge leaned forward. "Elijah," he said gently, "do you know what's happening today?" The boy nodded. "They want to take me away." "Do you want to go?" Elijah looked at Miriam, then at Cal. His voice was barely a whisper. "No, sir, sir." The judge let out a long breath. Scribbled something on a pad. "There's no formal claim from the other party prior to this filing. No evidence of mistreatment. No grounds for removal." He looked up. "The child stays with Miriam Jensen. Case dismissed." Miriam didn't cry right away. She stood frozen, hand gripping the edge of the bench. Carl reached over and touched her elbow, grounding her, and only then did she breathe. Her knees nearly buckled. Elijah clung to her waist, and she sank down to hold him, forehead pressed against his hair. The other family rose and left without a word. The lawyer snapped his brief closed and stormed off. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight stretched across the street like gold brushed over mud. They didn't speak on the way back to the boarding house. Didn't need to. That night, Cole placed the ring on the table between them again. No pressure. No words. This time she picked it up. Summer rolled in heavy and slow, thick with the hum of bees and the scent of warm dirt. The ranch stretched wide under a sky so big it made you feel small and safe all at once. Wildflowers pushed up between fence posts. The chickens wandered farther than they should. Elijah ran barefoot through the high grass, his laughter scattering crows. Miriam sat on the porch most mornings now, the hem of her dress damp with dew, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Cole had started brewing strong enough to wake the dead. She watched the land with a quiet sort of contentment. Not peace exactly, it was too hard won to be that, but something steadier. A life, perhaps. The ring caught the light on her finger as she wiped her hands on her apron. She still wasn't used to the weight of it. Still touched it when her thoughts wandered. She hadn't asked for a ceremony. Cole hadn't offered one. What they had didn't need to be declared in front of strangers. He gave her his name one evening as the sun went down, standing beside her while Elijah fed the horses. No kiss, no promise of forever, just the name and her quiet yes. They buried it deep in work. The cattle needed branding. The fence on the west pasture sagged where winter had torn it loose. Cole taught Elijah how to carry a bucket without spilling, how to tie a proper knot. He never said much, but the boy watched every move and in time began to mirror him. Miriam saw it and said nothing, afraid to name it and make it fragile. She'd begun keeping a ledger in the evenings, marking feed costs, tallying harvest. They had enough now, just enough to dream a little. A second barn. More hens. A mare that Elijah might one day ride alone. It was strange to plan beyond a season. Stranger still to believe those plans might hold. One afternoon, as the heat lay thick across the hills, Cole came in from the field early. He'd been quiet all week, distracted. She met him at the door, wiping sweat from her neck with the back of her hand. "Something wrong?" she asked. He hesitated. "Got a letter." Her stomach tensed. "From who?" "My uncle's lawyer. About the land in Wyoming." She nodded, waiting. "Says it's mine if I want it. Still waiting on my decision." He looked up, eyes steady on hers. "I told him no." Miriam exhaled slowly. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He stepped closer, took her hand in his. His thumb brushed against the inside of her wrist. "This place, it's not much. But it's where I belong now. With you. With him. That land out there, it's just dirt. This," he looked around them, "this is home." She leaned into him, rested her head on his shoulder. "You're a fool," she murmured. "Always have been." That night, Elijah crawled into bed between them after a bad dream. Neither pushed him away. Miriam smoothed his hair until his breathing slowed again. Cal lay quiet, one hand resting on the boy's back. "We should build another room," she whispered. "We will." The windows were open. Crickets sang. Somewhere out near the barn an owl called once and fell silent. The air smelled like earth and wood smoke and coming rain. In the dark her fingers found his. He didn't speak, just laced them together and held tight. The world outside would keep spinning hard and fast and full of things they couldn't control. But inside this house, in this moment, they had enough. More than enough. Subscribe and be part of these journeys where despair meets redemption under the wide frontier sky.